My name is David Miller. I am 58 years old, and this story begins not with celebration, but with the kind of silence that can crush a man if he lets it. It was Father's Day, and my family gathered around a table that looked polished and perfect, as if the shine could hide the cracks. Let me introduce the people who matter in this story. My daughter Lily is 25, beautiful and ambitious, a woman whose smile can light up a room, but whose words can cut just as deep. My ex-wife Carol is 56, elegant but cold, a woman who measures people by what they provide and not who they are. My son Adam is 27, a quiet presence, steady but often caught between loyalties. My brother Mark is 60, sharp-tongued and competitive, always ready to point out another man's weakness. And then there is Anna, my neighbor and longtime friend, 55, who has stood beside me in the shadows when family pulled away. These are the people who would turn my Father's Day into a battlefield. But before I tell you what happened, let me speak to you, the one listening right now. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, whether it's your living room, your car, or your kitchen. Because what I'm about to share isn't just a story. It's a warning. It began that morning with the smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread filling my house. Food Carol had insisted on ordering rather than cooking. She said it was more efficient, but what she meant was that it was easier to pretend nothing was broken if everything came neatly wrapped. Adam set the table, his movements careful, avoiding my eyes. Lily arrived last, wearing a bright red dress that seemed designed for a stage rather than a family meal. She kissed her mother on the cheek, hugged her brother quickly, and then turned to me. For a moment, I thought she might hug me too. Instead, she smiled. A sharp, cutting smile. "Happy Father's Day," she said, and her voice carried an edge. I nodded. "Thank you." We sat. We ate. We passed plates. Carol spoke of her new job. Mark bragged about his investments. Adam mentioned something about his classes. I tried to join in, but every word I offered seemed to fall flat. The air felt heavy, as if waiting for something. And then it came. Lily set down her glass, looked me directly in the eye, and smiled again, softer this time but cruel. "You were never enough," she said. The words landed harder than any slap. Carol didn't look up. Mark smirked. Adam froze, fork halfway to his mouth. And me? I swallowed, nodded, and said nothing. Because while my daughter thought her words would break me, what she didn't know was that I had proof. Proof of everything they had hidden, everything they had whispered, everything they had stolen. Proof that would turn this Father's Day into the day they wished had never come. But revenge is not taken in anger. It is prepared in silence. And I had been preparing for months. And now let me ask you, the one listening to my story, what would you do if your own daughter smiled at you on Father's Day and said, "You were never enough"? Would you cry? Would you shout? Or would you do what I did? Hold your silence, bide your time, and wait for the moment to strike back with proof? Hold that thought, because this story is only just beginning. I sat there at that table, the sting of Lily's words running through me like ice water, but I didn't move. I didn't argue. I didn't demand an explanation. That would have been giving her exactly what she wanted, the spectacle of a broken man lashing out on the day meant to honor him. Instead, I looked down at my plate and let silence do its work. Silence, after all, is heavier than any insult. It forces others to sit with their own noise. The meal carried on awkwardly, with Carol quickly shifting the conversation toward her recent promotion, Mark chiming in with smug comments about his returns in the stock market, and Adam stirring his food without eating. I excused myself early, saying I needed fresh air, and stepped outside onto the porch. The evening sky was painted in streaks of orange and red, the kind of beauty that mocks the ugliness inside a house. I lit a cigarette I had promised myself I'd quit, and as the smoke curled upward, I let my mind run back over the last few months. Because what Lily didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been documenting everything. It started small, just a nagging suspicion after Carol and I finalized our divorce. I had agreed to let her manage certain accounts for the kids, accounts meant for their education, their future. But statements had gone missing. Numbers didn't add up. Then came whispers I caught when I wasn't supposed to hear. A hushed conversation between Lily and Carol about covering tracks and keeping Dad out of it. That was when I started keeping records. I bought a small fireproof box and filled it with copies of statements, printouts of transactions, and even a few voice recordings I'd managed to capture when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Every piece of paper was a brick in the wall I was building, a wall that would eventually stand taller than their lies. I found out that Lily had been helping her mother funnel money from those accounts into Carol's personal ventures. Trips, clothes, investments she bragged about to her friends. And Mark, my own brother, was in on it too. He'd been advising them, teaching them how to move things around without triggering too much suspicion. The betrayal was layered, not just one person, but a chorus of voices singing the same deceitful tune. Adam, though, remained different. He never participated. If anything, he seemed burdened, like a man forced to watch a play he hated but couldn't walk out of. That night, after everyone had left, I went into my study and unlocked the fireproof box. I spread the papers out on my desk, one by one, like a deck of cards. Bank transfers, forged signatures, even an email chain where Lily had mocked me to Carol, writing that I was too simple to ever notice what was happening. My hands shook as I read, but not from weakness, from control, because each document was a weapon, and I was patient enough to wait for the right battlefield. The next morning, I called Emma, my sister, the only person who had never treated me like a fool. I told her everything, and she told me something I hadn't expected, that she had seen Carol and Mark together late at night, whispering in corners, exchanging envelopes. She suspected it had gone on longer than I knew, that my marriage had been rotting from the inside long before the divorce. She offered to help me organize the files, to make sure they would hold up not just in my hands, but in front of any authority that mattered. Together, we built a binder. Neatly tabbed, chronologically ordered, evidence lined up so clearly that even a stranger could see the theft. But I didn't stop there. I wanted voices, not just papers. So I placed a small recorder near the porch swing, the one where Lily liked to sit and talk on the phone. Weeks passed, and one evening it caught her. Her voice, soft and cruel, saying to a friend, "Dad never was enough. He doesn't understand money. He doesn't understand ambition. Mom and Uncle Mark are the ones who actually make things happen. He's just filler." I played that recording back over and over, each word slicing deeper than the last. But instead of breaking me, it sharpened me. I saved it, labeled it, added it to the binder. And that was when I knew this Father's Day would not end the way she expected. But revenge isn't built in a day. It's layered, like their lies, and it takes patience to set it right. I waited, I gathered, and I planned. And now let me pause and speak to you, the one listening right now. What would you do if your own child, your flesh and blood, called you never enough, while secretly stealing from the future you built for them? Would you confront them immediately, risk being dismissed as paranoid, or would you do what I did? Gather every piece of truth, every shred of proof, until the weight of it could crush the lies in one blow? Think carefully, because the choice between anger and patience is the choice between noise and justice. By the time Father's Day arrived, my binder was full. Proof of the stolen accounts, proof of Mark's involvement, proof of Carol's lies, proof of Lily's betrayal in her own voice. I had it all, ready and waiting. That night, after the cruel words she spoke at the table, I walked back inside and looked at each of them. Carol sipping wine like a queen, Mark smirking as though he had already won, Lily scrolling on her phone with a smirk she thought I couldn't see, and Adam staring at me with quiet guilt in his eyes. I realized then that the proof wasn't just paper. It was people, their own words, their own arrogance, their own underestimation of me. And soon, I would turn it all against them. Because Father's Day wasn't going to end with me broken. It was going to end with them exposed. I did not rehearse the moment when my proof would become a blade. I had rehearsed everything else. How I would hand the binder to the detective without tremor. What words I would use if a reporter asked me in the courthouse yard. How I would breathe when the judge read a sentence. Rehearsals steadied me like a scaffold. The real moment arrived on a cold Tuesday at the precinct, fluorescent lights and linoleum, and a man whose name was Patterson who wore patience like a uniform. I showed him the binder and watched his face move from polite curiosity to something hard and exact. He read. He listened to the recordings. He ran his thumb along the corner of a bank printout and asked for copies. We sat in the interview room and I told him, in the plain voice Patricia had coached me to keep, the story I had lived. The missing statements, the transfers, the jokes that had been anything but. He took notes as if he were a man taking attendance at a funeral for a life that had once been quiet and ordinary and had become something else. When he left the room to make calls, I breathed like a man who had been holding his breath underwater and was allowed a single mouthful. The law took its first slow steps. An investigator from the bank came to my apartment with a badge and a clipboard and the sort of careful questions that made me think of a surgeon choosing a scalpel. He asked about my signatures, about dates I could verify, about the time I had been at home when a transfer had gone through. He ran my account history against the ledger I had found, and somewhere in the spreadsheets the river I had traced became a current big enough for authorities to follow. A subpoena was issued. The first quiet knock that startled me was not at my door, but at Carol's home, where police asked questions that tasted like fear. Carol posted polite social media updates that night about unforeseen audits and misunderstandings. Mark called me twice, first to insist nothing was wrong, second to beg me to stop letting pride get in the way. I did not respond to Mark. I let the process do its work. The first public tremor came when the bank issued a statement saying they had found irregular transfers flagged to third-party accounts and that they were cooperating with law enforcement. That press release landed on my kitchen table like a small victory, not violent or loud, only the kind of neat, factual sound the world makes when it is trying to be honest. Around me, people I had barely known before the binder. Emma, the sister who had helped me organize the evidence. Alan, the former employee who had risked his job to print emails, began to act like a chorus. They spoke to investigators, they gave statements, and their names became anchors in the file. The file grew heavy and authority moved. We were not taking this to court because we wanted to punish family theatrically. We were taking it because there is an arithmetic to theft and a dignity to restitution. The district attorney's office convened a meeting and looked at the papers and asked the exact kinds of questions that made me grateful for every receipt I'd copied. "Do you want them prosecuted?" Jennifer asked, her pen poised. The truth was not a single answer. I wanted justice, yes. I wanted restitution for the accounts that had been drained and for the years where my footstep had been minimized into a footnote. I wanted the pattern, the structure of excuses and euphemisms and false documents, named and stopped so it could not be used on someone else. "Yes," I said finally. "Yes, but use the law. Let it not be spectacle." Jennifer nodded as if I had given water to something she had already been tending. When the first subpoenas hit Mark's offices and Carol's small investment firm, the posture of those rooms changed. Mark's confident phone calls fell into static and then into silence. Carol's social media shrank to vacation pictures that no longer seemed to glow. Lily tried to keep living as if nothing had changed. She posted a smiling selfie with a filter that washed the edges off her face. The filter did not fool the investigators. The bank produced a ledger linking transfers to a corporation used as a holding company. The ledger's trail ended at a condo purchased in cash with checks routed through the holding company. We had the ledger. We had the condo documents. We had emails that instructed internal accounting teams to label transfers as support and to keep RB credit stable. It was a language they had invented to make theft look like care. We had also, crucially, the recording where Lily had said I was filler and the message where she had laughed about how easy it was to keep Dad out of the details. Those words were not eloquent, but they were honest in a way their polite denials could never be. The DA called it a pattern. My lawyer read the phrase with quiet satisfaction. Patterns are what courts recognize. Patterns show intent. The grand jury convened. I waited in a room that smelled like coffee and old vinyl chairs, clutching my notebook the way one clutches a talisman. The subpoena that followed felt like a key turning. Search warrants executed, files extracted from Mark's server, emails pulled from cloud accounts. When agents came to Carol's home to catalog jewelry and receipts and ask for access to her accounts, she sat on a couch and looked like a woman who had been surprised by gravity. I had imagined her face in 1,000 scenarios, defiant, indignant, remorseful. Surprised gravity was not one I expected. The phone calls I avoided were the ones from Lily. When she did call, her voice had an edge that sounded like someone being asked to step off a stage. "Dad," she said once, and the word was an attempt, not a reach. I answered because I wanted my access to truth to remain clear. "I'm not your enemy," she whispered. "We didn't mean," I cut her off gently. "You meant what you did," I said. "You chose. The law will do the rest." The criminal case moved forward with the slowness of winter. There were dates set, continuances, a defense that suggested confusion and reliance on accountants, a counsel who attempted to make everything look like a complicated family arrangement rather than the arithmetic of theft. The press smelled the story and camped at the courthouse, but Patricia and Jennifer had rehearsed the phrase I would use in public, and lawyers handled the rest. It was not a media circus. It was a ledger in a room asking to be read. When the indictment came, counts for elder financial abuse, forgery, and conspiracy, it landed with a seriousness that made people's faces shift. I had prepared for that moment by organizing my life around small, dependable habits, waking early, eating stabilizing meals, keeping in touch with the people who had stayed true. The courtroom itself felt both like a theater and a machine. The defense tried to paint me as a man confused by technology, but the evidence told a different story. The surgeon-like accuracy of the bank's forensic accountant translated numbers into a map. Money had moved not by accident, but by design. The jury listened. The recordings were played. The room cooled. During the testimony, I sat in the witness box and told the truth the way I had written it down in my notebook. In a measured, step-by-step recounting of nights at the warehouse, dates when transactions were checked and not found, the day I sat in my son's office and photographed the checkbook full of entries that were not mine. I felt small at times, human in a way that made the truth more real, not less. When the verdict came, guilty on the majority of counts, something in me unclenched. It was not triumph so much as release, the way a body relaxes after carrying a heavy load across a room. The judge's sentence was tempered by law and by the reality that punishment does not always equal healing. Mark pleaded guilty later to charges tied to his orchestration. Carol accepted responsibility for the financial transactions and agreed to restitution. Lily, who had been younger in the face of the court than she had at the dinner table, received a lesser sentence in part because of her cooperation and a mandate for counseling and restitution plans. She was not jailed for years. The law considered age, remorse, cooperation. That did not make the outcome easy. There were conversations about whether I wanted public vengeance. I did not. I wanted the ledger corrected and the accounts replenished insofar as the law allowed, and I wanted the pattern stopped. Restitution payments began trickling in slowly and then more steadily, tied to the sale of the condo and to Mark's assets. The society of people who had applauded my son's generosity sat, perhaps for the first time, with the math behind public pronouncements. Some of them reached out, some did not. Silence can sometimes be as damning as anything else. When the dust settled, the family did not all assemble for forgiveness. Healing cannot be legislated. My relationship with Lily became a series of small, guarded steps. She called once, after sentencing documents were filed, and asked if we could meet for coffee. I agreed, with the condition that we sit in a public place and that nothing be said that was not honest. She arrived and looked older than her years. She apologized in a way that was fragmented and real. She spoke of ambition that had gone too far, of being taught to equate worth with acquisition, of not understanding how easy it was to believe your own story. She confessed that there had been moments, private moments, where shame woke her in the night. Her eyes were wet and unsure. I sat and listened. There is a particular mercy in hearing the person who wronged you speak their truth without performance. It does not erase the past. It does not fix bank statements. But it opens a door that can, over time, lead to a different room. I told her, plainly, that I was proud of the work I had done to put the evidence together, that I had done it not out of a desire to humiliate, but to protect others from a pattern. I said forgiveness might be possible in time, but that trust would need to be rebuilt in many small, verifiable ways. No access to accounts, joint supervision of any funds intended for me, written agreements, and therapy. She nodded and agreed, and that seemed like a small victory. Not for closure, but for honesty. The fallout extended beyond our family. The local paper ran a series on elder financial abuse that used our case as a way to teach others how to protect themselves. Keep copies of bank statements. Insist on seeing where support actually lands. Never allow a signature to be used without your presence. I started speaking at community centers and bank seminars, not about revenge, but about the practicalities, how to keep a notebook, how to ask for paper, how to handle conversations that try to make you feel incompetent for asking. There was a quiet power in teaching people how to document their lives. People came to the talks clutching folders of their own evidence, photocopied checks, receipts, emails. They brought stories of in-laws who took more than affection, of caregivers who had steered pensions into private ventures, of children who had learned to spin narratives to make themselves look generous. We formed a small network, a lawyer who would give a few hours pro bono each month, a retired bank teller who would teach safe record-keeping, a reporter who offered to cover cases without sensationalizing them. That work felt like repair. It was not dramatic. It was patient, like scrubbing a floor until it shone for its own sake. Over time, restitution began to matter in the practical way money always does. The accounts I had created for my grandchildren, the college funds that had been drained, were replenished enough to change trajectories. Scholarships applied for, a community college tuition paid, repairs done to a car that started when winter came. Money could not make up for years of being told I was never enough. It could, however, prevent concrete harm, and that is justice of a particular kind. People asked me if I hated them. If I hated Lily, hated Carol, hated Mark. Hate is a heavy thing, and I do not believe in carrying heavy things when lighter ones can teach you how to stand. I felt anger for a long time, a sharp, honest thing that kept me awake. But anger shifted when I saw the way other people's lives changed because of what I had done. Anger became a tool, not an identity. I did not hate my child. I felt sorrow first, then disappointment, and now a guarded hope that honesty and consequence would teach the things a lecture never could. The hardest nights were not the ones in court. They were the small, domestic ones. The morning I found a note tucked under my door from a neighbor who wrote that she had always respected me and was sorry she had not noticed sooner. The evening a young man at one of my talks hugged me and sobbed because he had been repairing his father's finances alone and felt invisible. The day Lily's son, my grandson, wrote me a letter saying he missed his granddad's stories. Those moments built a new house out of the wreckage. They also carved a rule into my life I never expected. I would never again let silence be the only language I used. When someone asked me in a television interview, carefully arranged, vetted by Jennifer and Patricia, what I wanted readers to remember, I said, ask for paper. Ask for statements older than a day. Keep a notebook. Bring someone with a steady voice. Breathe with the door. In on the open, out on the close. It was the same practical advice I had given strangers in church basements and bank conference rooms. It was also the advice I had used in my own life to stand tall. Years later, Mark's firm closed and he moved to a quieter town. Carol ran classes on financial literacy in a small community center, her own restitution payments spent on scholarships she donated in penance. She wrote me a letter once that was not an apology, not at first. It was an explanation, an attempt to place the shape of her choices under a different light. I read it and tucked it into a sleeve and set it beside the signed note Lily had given me that first time she asked to meet. Those sleeves are still in my drawer. I keep them not as trophies, but as maps. Sometimes I walk past them and feel the room in my chest open wide. People ask whether the family reconciled fully. The honest answer is no. Families are complex. Some bridges mend into something steady and usable. Others remain footbridges with gaps that are never filled. Lily speaks to me sometimes on the phone. We set appointments and promises, and sometimes we break them, and sometimes we keep them. My relationship with Carol is functional, courteous at family gatherings, practical when it comes to grandchildren. Mark and I do not speak much. He called once to apologize and then again to ask a favor. I did not answer the second call. I chose, and choose still, where to place my energy. Not all wounds need to be reopened to be acknowledged. The public part of the story receded into local memory with the steady speed of seasons. But the private work, the teaching, the small talks, the conversations in kitchens where people asked how to keep their names from being used as props, continued. I wrote a short guide and donated copies to senior centers. I taught a class called Paper and Voice, where I explained how evidence moves from a drawer to a court and how courage moves from a single voice to a chorus. The most surprising outcome was this. People began to speak to me not because they wanted to replay their pain, but because they wanted a map out. They brought folders and asked me to help them label items, to keep their notations clear. There was grace in that mundane work. It was not pretty, but it was necessary, and it made me feel useful in a way that applause never had. If you are still listening, if you are holding a folder or a phone or a memory that feels too heavy, let me say one last thing plainly. You are not a costume for someone else's good publicity. Your name is not an accessory. If someone uses your name to make themselves crowned, ask for the math. Ask for statements older than a week. Keep copies. Bring someone with a steady voice and a steady notebook. If they tell you to trust them and to stop asking questions, that is your alarm. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is protection for a lie. I am not a man of grand epilogues. The world I wake up in has both hard edges and soft corners. I sweep my small kitchen and make coffee, and sometimes I still drive an old car that coughs when winter comes. I take the bus sometimes and see people who nod because they recognize the shape of my face from a small article. Men who look like they once thought silence was safety. I tell them my honest line. We are not done. Keep the door from swinging shut. That is what I wrote on the last page of my notebook in a steadier hand than the one that began this story. It is a reminder for myself and a note I tuck into the folders of anyone who asks. The work does not end with a verdict or with restitution. It continues in kitchens and basements and bank lobbies. It continues in the quiet of people who learn to lift their hands and say, "Show me the paper." If you have a folder in your hand right now, check what it holds. If it holds your name, keep it visible. If it holds only air and applause, ask for the accounting. Tell one person the truth. Breathe with the door. In the open, out on the close. That is the work we do together.